called lab 2. We use a default setting, and the template that we use is an empty activity. All right, so that's my starting point. I will have one activity added to this project, which is main activity, and the layout for this activity is activity_main. What we noticed with the previous groups is that there is a bug. When they generate this project, there is a problem with the style, and it prevents the tool from generating a proper view in the layout editor. What we have to do, we have to go to styles, and we have to change the parent style. We have to add base dot to the name. That will fix the problem. You save this, and you can go back to activity_main to the layout, and you will see that right now you can edit it visually. You can work with your layout. I want to add three items to this view. Well, one of them is already there, which is the text view. That is my output, right? That's the label. You can use it in many different ways, but today I will use it as output. I will change the content of this label. The layout that is used by default is a constraint layout. What it allows you to do, it allows you to put controls on the screen and define the place for those controls in relation to other objects, right? So you can either define it in relation to the parent, which is the main screen, the main frame that we have, or in relation to other components on the screen. And you do that through the constraint. It's a similar approach that you will find in iOS next semester, right? So we'll be adding controls, and we'll be defining the constraints for those controls. How do you add elements? You simply drag and drop, and you can drag elements either to the view here, or you can drag them to the component tree that is on the bottom below the palette. All right? And you edit those elements through the attributes inspector on your right. So you can click either on the element in the component tree or on the screen, and you can modify properties. There are two views, and they're helpful in different situations. One is a long view that is showing you all the properties of the selected view, and you can search, you can filter those properties. So you click on the search button, you can type in the name, and it will filter those properties. If you click on those two arrows, it will switch to the kind of a shorter view that is showing selected properties. And you can see here that you can also edit some properties in a visual editor, right? So for my label, what I wanted to be on the top of the screen, and I wanted to take the whole width of the screen with a little margin on the side, right? So what I will do, first I will disable this constraint that is holding it on the bottom, simply by clicking here on this circle, right? You can also do it in the editor, just clicking on the circle. You see that there is a little X. If you click on that, it will remove the constraint. And automatically, this this field moves up, right, to the top of the screen. It is attached to both margins, and we can define what is the distance, what is the margin. Right now it's 0. I want to have 8 points on both sides and also from the top. And now I have two properties below, layout width and layout height. By default, those two settings will be, those two properties will be set to wrap content. I will change the layout width to match constraint. what it will do, it will stretch the control, right? So we'll have the margin on each side. If you want to show your text in the center, right now it's on the left. If you want to change that, what you have to do, you have to find, not in this view, in the long view, you have to find a property that is called gravity. And with the gravity, you can select the position, right? So what I want to have center. This view can also change the size of the text and so on. You can do it in few ways. You can either manually specify size, font, color, and so on, or you can use one of the templates, one of the styles that are predefined. And there is a property called text appearance here. From the combo, you can select different styles. You have some predefined styles. Let's select display one. It will be this big font. One property that is quite important for us is ID. We need to specify ID because that will be our key that will be used to find those controls and use them in the code. This control doesn't have any. What we should do, we should scroll up in the short view, we should scroll up and name it. Let's say text view. In bigger projects with more controls, you need to have more imagination naming it. This ID should be unique, and they should tell you what this field is, so you can find it later on, right? So that's my ID. Now, you know that we can edit layouts either in this tool visually, or we can do the same thing, switching to the text. We can edit text, right? We can edit XML, right? That's the XML that is generated for my view so far, right? So I have a layout that is the root element, and then I have a text view that is sitting inside, and I have constraints defined. Okay, next element that I want to add will be edit text. That will be the input box. You have few templates that you can use. Because on mobile it's important to be specific in terms of what kind of input you expect, right? If it's a plain text, then you have a full keyboard and you can type anything, but you can narrow it down, right? You can say that I expect a phone number, or I expect an email, or I expect a numerical input, right? Plus, you can say that this is a password, and you want the characters to be masked as they're entered, right? So let's say I want to have a field that is a password and it's numeric. Right, so I'm selecting this one, adding it to the view. Here it is. By default, it will be added without constraints, right? So it will be pushed to the top and to the left. If you take a look at the XML, number password is a type of the input, right? And this is changing the way how the keyboard will be presented and how the entered text will be presented. Okay, what are the constraints that I want to add? I want this field to be attached to the parent, and I can do it in two ways, right? I can click on the dot on the edge of the field and drag it to the parent. That's one way. Or I can click on this plus here, and it will do exactly the same thing. Right? I think it is easier to do it in the field. I want to do exactly the same thing that I did for the for my label. So I want the width of this field to be back to back. So I want to match constraint, right? It's automatically stretched. What about the top? I want this edit box to be below my label, right? So I don't want to attach it to the parent, to the edge of the screen, but I want to attach this to the bottom of the label, right? And I will select some distance, say 24 points. Right, so you see that they're connected. You can do it in another way. You can switch to the long view, and in constraints, you can find the constraint that is called top to bottom off. Top of the current field will be attached to the bottom of some other field, and from the combo here, you can select ID of the other field or the parent. You can see that there is a default ID that is generated when we add new fields, edit text. I'm okay with this ID because I will distinguish my controls. Again, when you have more, you need to name them in a way that you will be able to identify fields based on the name, right? If you want this field to be more visible, what you can do, you can find in the long view, you can find the background property. You can click on the three dots, and then you'll be able to either select something from predefined colors in Android. You can select one of those. You can select something from the theme. For example, what we can select here. Maybe this grayish color, or you can define your own colors in the project, in resources, and you can select one of those, right? So let's make it darker gray. It will be nicely visible on the white background. That's my edit box, right? I can make the font bigger. I can change the text presentation. Maybe we should do that, actually. Probably notice that there is a warning here. Let's take a look. Missing accessibility label. What it tells me that I should provide a hint, because this is edit box, it's empty. We should provide a hint for the users, what to type, right? What is the entry that we expect? Now, we can do it in a few different ways. I can hard code the value, right? In. But I told you last week that Android doesn't really like hard coding, right? And you can see another warning. Hard-coded string pin should use add string resource. So let's follow this. Let's follow those instructions, right? Instead of hard coding, I will go to project. I will open XML file string, and I will add new entry. String int I added a new entry to my resources, to the file string XML. This file is sitting in folder called values, which is in resources. Now I can use this value. So I can go back to my activity underscore main to the layout. I'm still editing like this. I'm still editing edit text. And I want to change the value of the property called hint. Instead of typing in the name, I will click on these three dots, and I will select the value from this list, right? It's called hint. The value is pin. I will select that. So right now I have label that is attached to the top of the screen and to both edges with some margin, 8 points. I have, sorry, I have entry field, so I have the input box that is of the type edit text. Again, constraints are attached to the edges, and it is attached to the label above. It is showing a hint. It has ID. Both fields have assigned ID. Now I'm ready to add the button. And I can grab the button, either put it here or here, right? Add it. I will attach it right away to my edit box and to both margins. I'll make sure that it is big enough. And I will make sure that the distance from the edit text to the button is also big enough. So when I tap on the button, I don't hit the pin or vice versa. You have this label button here. That's something that we don't like. Well, Android doesn't like it either because it's hard-coded. So let's go back to our strings. Let's add label for my button. String button label. We submit.
So what is attaching? What does attaching do when we like move this arrow up to?
It defines the distance. Well, it tells me that it tells the layout that this position of this element will be defined in the relation to that edge of that element, right? So when I'm dragging it from the top edge of my control, of one control to the bottom edge of the other control, it means that we are defining the position of the top edge let's say of the button in this case, in relation to the bottom edge of the edit.
So it's like absolute. So it's like absolute position.
It's not absolute position. It's relational, right? Absolute position would be defining the position in the relation of the corner of this screen, right?
Okay.
In this case, we don't do that. We say that these two things are attached, and that's the distance between them, right? If I have my label defined, I can go back and I can change this, right? There is a text view that is part of the button, right? If you scroll down, you see text, and the text says button. I'm clicking on the three dots, and I will select button label, and it will be submit right now. Why we are doing that? Why we are attaching those constraints? Why we are defining those constraints? We're defining them because it will allow us to structure the screen without really knowing the exact dimensions of the screen that user will have, right? The simple example, right? If I change the orientation of the screen to landscape, you see how it changes, right? All those boxes are stretched to the full width of the screen. I don't have to do anything else with that. If you change the if you change the device, let's say I want to use what? Another phone. It adjusts automatically, right? That's why we are using constraints. You can specify different layouts for different screens, and at some point we'll start doing that, adding different layout for, let's say, tablet, right? Or different layout if you go with this application as an application that can be run on a TV, you can provide another layout, right? So that's the next step. Right now, we want to have application, we want to have UI that will adjust automatically and will stick to more or less the same layout. So we have three controls. The ID for the last one is button. Again, not very informative. It doesn't tell me what the button is doing. I'm okay with that. We can change it to, for example, BTN submit, right? Button submit. Anything will work as long as your ID is unique. You cannot repeat the same ID for different controls, because that will cause an error later on in the runtime. We have that. If we want to test, how it looks on the phone, we can run our application. Hopefully, this will run. I will select Nexus 5. In running this before, it is starting. That's my application. I can change the orientation, and you know what? I will do that. I don't like the fact that it is starting. In a landscape mode. I will change it to portrait. Finish. Okay. Let's start. This is building the application. Let emulator is starting. We should see the application running in a second. So this is my app. Hello world, that's the text that I'm showing. If I click into the edit box, you see that the keyboard is numerical, right? It's a number pad. That's because I selected this specific type of the input. And it is masking the input because it is a password, right? Okay. So we have our UI designed. Now, what we want to do, we want to add some functionality, right? So to do that, we have to go to the activity. In the activity, we have a function that is called onCreate. And in this function, we have line that is calling the function set content view. This is the moment when the whole UI is created. Right? We are saying to the activity that's the template that you should use, right? r.layout.activity main. That's the template that you should use. After this call, you have the UI created, and you can start using those controls. So for example, you can attach some functionality to the button. Let's do that. To attach something to the button, I have to find the button first. I need to get the reference to the button, right? So I will define a variable called button. Piece of advice, use this to help you. If you select the type from the list, it will add automatically the import that is required to use that type. Button btn will be equal to find view by ID. And what is the ID that I'm looking for? r.id. Would be button. Didn't we name it? BT and submit. Sorry, my bad. BT and submit. I have a reference. Button has a function called set onClick listener, and this function is taking a reference to the object that is implementing an interface that is called onClick listener. We can do it in two ways right now. We can either create a new object that will implement that, or we can make our activity onClick listener, right? So it implements onClick listener. And I want the first one. I want the one from the view. There is also onClick listener that is coming from different library, different package from Dialog. I want to use one that is coming from android.view.view. It is showing that something is wrong, right? Red underscore saying that I'm missing some methods. I can solve it in two ways, right? I can either implement the methods or make my activity abstract. Making it abstract is the good idea? No, because what abstract means. Sorry? Abstract means that at first, for the class, that I cannot instantiate it, right? So that's not the choice. Implement methods. The method that I have to implement is onClick from onClick listener. Right, so I'm adding the method, and now I can use reference to my activity, this, to set the listener for the button. When we'll click the button, the call will come to this method. And to test it, I will change the text that is displayed by my label. So first I have to find the label. Text, view. I'm doing exactly the same thing for the label. I have to find it, right? So r.id.textView, here it is. And TextView has a function set text that is taking a string as a parameter. We can test it, right? It's alive. You can change many other properties, right? You can change the background, you can change the font. Any property that is defined or can be modified through the property controller, right? Through the property inspector in the layout editor, you can modify also from the code, right? Okay, let's save this and let's test it. Yes. Waiting till it starts. Should be soon. Okay, here it is, right? If I click the button, changes the text to it's alive. You're with me?
Short break.
We'll finish this. We'll finish this, and then I will help you with whatever is missing. Because there's one more step that I want to show you. I want to show you how you can get the edit text. Edit text to get input from the user, right? Find view by ID, RID, edit text. You see that working with any view right now is more or less this contains the same steps. We have to find the control on the screen, get the reference, and then through this reference we can do stuff with it, right? I won't be modifying this right now because I will do the following. I want to take the input. It will be a string input from the edit text, et.getText. I will have an int and this int right now set to 0 will set this value from from the string that we got as an input, right? So if input is not equal to the empty string, we want to get our pin, right? So pin equals to integer dot parse int input. Now, if our pin is equal to some predefined value, right, the right value, then we'll do this, else not this time. Maybe I will also change the background color, set background color. This will be green. And this will be red. You can test it. Okay, so we are entering a pin, not this time. Like. to review everything. We created a new layout, right? We've added 3 different controls, and we use the layout editor to specify the constraints, right? So we have our layout, we have 3 different components, 3 different views, and we have defined those constraints, saying that there is a margin, this is attached to the edges, these 2 controls are attached to the top one. Right, so we have our layout defined. Then we went to activity, and in activity, we have turned our main activity to the on-click listener. We attach this listener to the button, and then in the method on-click, we did our job, right? So the job is pretty simple right now, but you have more or less the idea how it works. If you have the same listener attached to the multiple buttons, what you do, you have to distinguish them based on ID. The view that you get in the as a parameter to on-click has ID, and based on this ID, you can identify which button is sending this this event, right? So next time, we'll start building application that will be a calculator, right? So we'll have multiple buttons. You'll see that this ID is important in this case, because you will be able to distinguish clicks from different buttons. Okay, saving this, I will stop the recording, and we can